Good morning, and good afternoon. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. We'll give it a few minutes and then we'll get started. As you are entering the webinar, please feel free to introduce yourselves with your name, your organization, and also what city and state you're coming from as well. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Well, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We'll get started in a few minutes. As you all are entering, please feel free to introduce yourselves, your name, your organization, and what city and state that you are calling in from. And we'll get started in a few minutes. Add Iman from Vallejo, from Illinois, North Carolina, Delia from Pontiac, Michelle from Cleveland. Awesome, awesome. Thank you all so much for joining us. Hey, Lydia out there in Baltimore. Tempe, Arizona, Chicago. Awesome, awesome. Welcome, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon. If you are just joining us, we'll get started in a few minutes. As you are coming in, please introduce yourself, your name, your organization, and also what city and state you are coming in from. I'm so excited about today's webinar and also excited when you all hear from two of our panelists as well. See, Connecticut, my home state, is here. Awesome. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. I see a lot of folks who we work with, also see some new partners that we are looking forward to working with as well. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm gonna give it another 30 seconds and then I'll get us started with today's webinar. Hopefully everyone is having a great week. Thank you all again so much for joining us. Awesome. So I'll get us started. Welcome to the Alliance for Safety and Justice and Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice National Webinar to discuss our latest victim survey titled Crime Survivors Speak 2024. My name is Aswad Thomas. I am the Vice President of the Alliance for Safety and Justice and also serve as the National Director of one of our flagship programs, which is called Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice. I'm so excited to be here with you all. As a reminder, this is a Zoom webinar, and so all attendees will not be on video. So please continue to engage with us via the chat box as you are now. As we are going throughout the webinar and talk about the survey findings, please use the Q&A feature as well to ask any questions. And then we have time at the end of the webinar to open up the floor for questions from you all. For those of you who might be new to our work at the Alliance for Safety and Justice, we actually began our work about 12 years ago. And we began our work with a very unique perspective. We wanted to move away from a conversation only about justice reforms in terms of reducing incarceration. Instead, we actually wanted to have and push the country to have a conversation, especially as it relates to in communities and also in policy about real safety. For us at the Alliance for Safety and Justice, the last decade of our work have been built on making that possible. And we know, and many of you all know this as well, that we shouldn't be having conversations about incarceration or safety without focusing on the experiences of people that have been both devastated by violence and also devastated by incarceration as well. And for us, that end goal has always been about what we call shared safety. And it's great to see a criminal justice and also a public safety reform movement that's really starting to embrace this concept, and what we all want is safety. And the foundational problem that we've had in this country is the way that crime policy has been built. It has been designed. And one thing about the way that crime policy in this country has been built and is seen in our public safety policies, that it has never been designed to protect people from harm. People who are survivors have not been protected from harm by the justice system, either before they got hurt or after they got hurt as well. And for decades, the voices of crime victims, especially crime victims from communities most harmed by crime and violence, have been left out of public safety discussions. And many of us have been also excluded from victim services as well. And that's what really drives our work here at the Alliance for Safety and Justice, which we are a multi-state public safety organization that really works to replace over incarceration with more effective public safety solutions that's rooted in crime prevention, community health, rehabilitation, and also support for crime victims and those coming out of the justice systems as well. We partner with many of you all on this call. We partner with federal, state leaders, as well as advocates to achieve safety and justice reforms through our advocacy work, organizing, trauma-informed grassroots organizing, coalition building, research, also communications as well. In our organization, we represent over 500,000 members who are victims of crime through our Crime Survivor for Safety and Justice program, and also those who are living with old records through our Time Done program as well. And at our organization, it really works to do three things. We build a community, we build skills, and we build power to change laws across the country. And so I'm so excited, for today's webinar. I'll quickly go through the agenda. So we'll spend time discussing some of the survey findings in our latest report. I'm also very excited, to have a panel discussion with two victims of violent crime you all will see and hear from them. In a few, we have Marty Liss. We also have Rafia Muhammad McCormick. Excited for you all to meet them and learn about their stories and their work that they are doing that really aligns with these survey findings as well. After that discussion with our panelists, we also will, provide some strategies on how you can use this survey to drive policy change in your communities, in your states as well. And then we'll open it up for Q&A from the audience. Remember to engage with us through the chat box. Use the Q&A feature as we walk through today's webinar. I've been with the Alliance for Safety and Justice almost 10 years now. I got into this work after being a victim of a violent crime where that shooting ended my professional basketball career. And like so many victims, I never received any support or services after that incident. But the thing that really helped me on my healing journey was connecting with other survivors across the country. So I spend a lot of my time this past decade, our organization, we spent a lot of time traveling the country. And the main thing that we are often doing is listening to the stories of survivors and their experiences with the justice system, and also their viewpoints on public policy as well. And to date, the Alliance for Safety and Justice, we have surveyed over 15,000 crime victims, and we have talked to thousands of survivors in local communities. You all, through this survey, you all will see, what are the experiences of survivors and what they think our justice system should look like as well. And in today's society, we are living in a moment of a dual crisis. On one hand, we have a public safety crisis, and on the other hand, we have this mass incarceration crisis. And people, seem to think that this crisis surrounding mass incarceration is totally different from the crisis surrounding public safety. But it turns out they're actually the same crisis. And the solution to this crisis is actually quite simple. That solution is we actually need to continue and need to do a better job of actually listening to crime victims. If we listen to what crime victims want, we will both solve the mass incarceration crisis. We also will solve this public safety crisis as well. And listening to crime victims has always informed our organizing work, our advocacy work, and also our communications and media strategies as well. And so many of you have this question, why should we actually survey victims of violence? Many of you know this, but I do think it's worth repeating. This popular assumption is that victims want punishment and long sentences. This is a deep rooted legacy of the criminal justice system, but also a deep rooted legacy of the traditional victims' rights movement that helped to advocate for a lot of the tough on crime policies we have today. And that traditional victims' rights movement excluded crime victims from those communities most impacted by violence, and that was instrumental in helping to the building of mass incarceration because policy makers believed that they were acting on behalf of victims when they implemented these punitive policies. And also, surveying victims is one way to show that the popular assumption is wrong, that victims want punishment and long sentences. And most victims do not support the tenets of mass incarceration as well. And so, the surveying of victims really set out to set the record straight on what individuals and communities most impacted by crime actually want and what will keep them safe as well. And in this survey, we were actually very surprised that a third of the respondents said that they were victims of violent crime. We didn't do any special targeting with our outreach to try to, find communities that were, have been higher concentration of violence and higher concentrations of crime victims. We actually intentionally went out pretty broadly to the general public, and the fact that a third of them identified as victims of violent crime, that just kind of surprised us. And so, part of, us surveying crime victims, and many of you may be familiar with our victim service surveys. And the first victim survey we ever did was back in 2016. So we have been doing a lot of research over the years. In 2016 was the first survey in the country that our organization, helped to really shift the narrative about who crime survivors are and what they want. And so back in 2016, we, in the first survey of crime victims' views on safety and justice, some of the highlights from that 2016 survey was that, by a 2-to-1 margin, that victims prefer the criminal justice system focus more on rehabilitating people who commit crimes rather than punishing them. We also found that 6 in 10 victims prefer shorter prison sentences and more spending on prevention and rehabilitation rather than prison sentences that keep people incarcerated for as long as possible. That was the first report we did in 2016, and many of you have used that foundation report and you all's work still today. And then in 2022, we conducted another survey of victims of crime, and we found similar findings to what we found in that 2016 report. A few things I want to highlight in the 2022 survey is that we found out that 96% of victims did not receive victim compensation to help them recover. We also found that in this 2022 report that people with old records are more likely to become victims of crime. In fact, 87% of people with a past conviction have been the victim of a crime in the past 10 years, and 6 in 10 have been a victim of a violent crime as well. So 96% of crime victims do not access victim compensation program, and those who are, came in contact with the justice system, have been a victim of a crime before, and many of them have been victims before they ever came in contact with the justice system as well. And also in that report, we also found that that victims prefer reducing local jail populations through safe alternatives to keeping people in jail as well. And so we do a lot of research, we do a lot of surveys. So in addition to these national surveys that I just talked about, we have released a number of reports on surveys of victims at the state level that support de-incarceration policies in those states, places like Texas, Florida, California, Michigan, Illinois. We do these type of surveys also at the state level as well. And also this month, we released another survey report in partnership with the Independent Rikers Commission in New York, to demonstrate that yes, victims of crime in New York as well do not want more incarceration. And so we find out over and over again, both through a lot of our research and surveys, but also in conversations with thousands of crime victims and survivors who we work with every single day through our Crime Survivor Safety and Justice program, is that what victims want the most is for what happened to them to never happen to anyone else. And victims prefer, stopping the cycle of violence rather than more punishment, rather than more incarceration. And victims want to stop the cycles of harm. They want to prevent crime from happening in the first place, and they also want to reduce unnecessary incarceration as well. And so now I want to to dive into these survey findings from our 2024 report that we had just released. And so I think three themes came out of this new survey. Is that the headlines is that victims of violent crime do not support policies that drive mass incarceration or mass over incarceration. And three things that stood out in this survey is that victims reject long sentences as the primary solution to crime. Victims prefer investments in communities over more spending on arrests and punishments. And also, victims prefer laws that enable judges and officials to exercise discretion over mandatory minimum sentences and also truth in sentencing laws as well. So now let's dive deeper into, so those are some of the themes, right? So I want to dive deeper into these survey results, and then we're going to hear from our panelists as well. So who are crime victims? Through this survey and through the experiences of many of you all, on today's webinar, violent victimization is actually a common experience. 1 in 3 Americans have been a victim of violence in the past 10 years. 1 in 5 Americans have been injured or threatened with physical force or a weapon in the past 10 years. People who live in lower income households are significantly more likely to be victims of violence than people in higher income households as well. Black and Latino Americans were significantly more likely to report violent victimization in the past 10 years. And also, Black Americans experienced violent victimization at a rate of 31% higher than white Americans, and Latino Americans experience violence at a rate of 25% higher than white Americans as well. So, those who are most harmed by crime and violence are often young people of color, people that live in low income communities and households as well. When it comes to the impact of victimization, victims of violence experience major hardships at such higher rates than people who did not experience violence. For example, and these have devastating and cascading consequences that impacts multiple domains of life, right? So, what we found out in this survey that nearly half, that's about 49% of people we surveyed say that they suffer from PTSD. Victims were, about 3.6 times as likely to experience bankruptcy through this victimization debt that many of us experience, and that and victims are more than 2 times as likely to experience a life-threatening illness after becoming victims as well. So as you all can see, violent victimization, often has those cascading impacts on survivors' lives. Becoming a victim of violence often causes someone to miss work, go without pay, and also endure challenges are related to physical and also mental health as well. And so, the impact on victims, not just physically, but also mentally, emotionally, but also financially as well, that so many of us as survivors experience what we found out through this survey. Many of you can identify with your own experience and also within the communities and families that you all work with as well. So we asked crime victims, what causes crime to go down? And when we ask that question, what causes crime to go down? And some of you are started to say this in the chat box as well, is that, by a margin of 3-1, victims think that access to more jobs, access to more housing leads to less crime compared to longer prison sentences, right? Access to more jobs, access to more housing, that leads to less crime rather than this assumption that longer prison sentences actually helps prevent crime and violence. And if we look at, the answers, to this question on your screen, like overall, 84% of victims did not name longer prison sentences as the reason crime goes down. I think that's very important to uplift that overall 84% of victims and victims of violent crime did not name longer prison sentences as the reason crime goes down. So then we asked about repeat crime. Even when asked about policies, that are effective at stopping repeat crimes, victims answered again with treatment and jobs. And so 2/3 of victims of violent crime think that the best way to stop people from committing repeat crimes are mental health and addiction treatment and job training, right? Things that help prevent repeat crimes, mental health, addiction treatment, and job training, not longer sentences. And so I think this is like a pretty important, a pretty telling finding that most people who are victims of violence understand that incarceration is not an answer, and that instead we need to invest in treatment, programs, economic opportunities are the things that actually keep communities safer. And if you all can agree with that, I just want to hear. I see Janice said yes. I want to. If you all agree with these findings so far, Would love you all to put it in the chat box. Yes, absolutely. If you don't agree with these policies, you also want to hear from you as well. And Kiera said, "Amen." Right. So, when you actually talk to crime victims, the things that we see that stop the cycles of crime and violence, like mental health, housing, jobs, trauma recovery, rehabilitation. Those are the things that help stop the cycle of violence as well. So, and also we also wanted to, we asked a lot of questions in this survey, and we also found out, that once again, victims of violence do not think long prison sentences are the most effective way to stop crime, and that victims of violence also prefer judges consider individual circumstances as well, right? And so on the left side of your screen, you'll see that less than 1 in 4 of all victims of violent crime think that long sentences are the most effective way to stop people from committing repeat crimes. 2 out of 3 victims of violent crime think that the best way to stop people from committing repeat crimes are mental health, and also addiction treatment and job training, as I just talked about. Right. And also, what we found is that, victims of violence overwhelmingly prefer sentencing policies that allow judges to consider the individual circumstances of the crime. So victims are 2.5 times more likely to prefer sentencing policies that account for individual circumstances to the sentencing policies that require uniform sentencing lists for all people convicted for certain crime categories as well. And so many of us heard the term of mandatory minimum sentences, right? So we also asked several questions about certain policies, so as you can see here, victims are 2.5 times more likely, to prefer sentencing policies that authorizes judge to consider those individual circumstances of a crime. The victim, the perpetrator, when determining the length of sentences, rather than sentencing policies that require that uniform sentences for all people convicted for certain crime categories, right? So victims prefer judges really look at the individual circumstances of a crime, the victim, and also the perpetrator individual cases when determining that length of sentence rather than sentencing policies that require that uniform sentencing list for all people convicted for certain crime categories as well. So then we ask questions about, different policies, when it comes to, sentencing policies. So for example, so you can see here that victims, support earned credit policies over truth in sentencing policies about 61 to 34%. So victims prefer we focus more on earned credit type of policies over the traditional truth in sentencing policies. And earned credit policies are policies that improve opportunities and also incentivizes people in prison to participate in educational, vocational, job training, and other recidivism reducing programs by allowing them to, if they complete these programs, it allow them to earn additional sentence credits for participating in completing these training programs. So it's really incentivizing folks who are incarcerated to go through a lot of the rehabilitation programs and training that individuals need, so that when they come home better than they were, and also come home with the skills and training to be productive members of society and also take care of themselves and their families as well. So I know I spent a lot of time wanted to walk through some of these survey findings. Once again, victims, continue to uplift what safety looks like to them. For most victims, safety is investing in housing, investing in jobs, investing in mental health, and ensuring that our policies also are policies that centered around rehabilitation rather than continue to be tough on crime as a way of stopping the cycles of violence. So I spent time talking about the survey findings. So now I'm super excited to transition today's webinar to be joined by a few of our amazing panelists. So as our panelists, you all can come on screen. So I introduced the two of them. So I'm excited. Hey, Marley, thank you so much for joining us. I'll be joined by Marley Liz and also Rafia Muhammad McCormick. I'll just do a quick introduction of the two of them as well. So Rafia Muhammad McCormick is a mother whose son was murdered in Tennessee. She is passionate about the power of redemption to prevent future violence and also passionate about the importance of healing communities, all communities impacted by trauma. Rafia served as the director of community outreach for Tennesseans for alternatives to the death penalty. She is also the founder of Rodney's Village, a nonprofit currently in its launch phase. Rodney's Village uses a cohort model to educate and support young parents ages 16 to 22 in creating safe and stable homes for their children. Additionally, Rafia plays a vital role in Mothers Over Murder, a flagship program of the Nashville Peacemakers that uplifts survivors of violent crime. And also, Rafia is a member of Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice as well. So, thank you, Rafia, for joining us today. Our next panelist is Marley. Marley Liz. Marley is a survivor of sexual assault. I'm excited to to be having Marley part of this conversation. Marley's case became the first in North America to conclude with restorative justice through the court. And so Marley will talk a little bit about that process. She's also an award-winning speaker, restorative justice advocate. She's an author. She's also the founder of Survivors for Justice Reform as well. As you all can briefly hear, right, Rafia and Marley are both passionate about restorative justice, the power of redemption to prevent future violence, and also advocating for a better justice system that prioritizes healing, prevention and rehabilitation, and also a second chance, also alternatives in the justice system as well. So thank you both for joining us to share your experiences and your perspectives on the justice system as victims of violent crime. Let's dive right into it. Marley, would love to start with you. This survey indicates that many victims do not see long sentences as the best solution to crime. In your personal experience as a sexual violence survivor, you told the prosecutors in your case you wanted a restorative justice outcome. Why did you advocate for that alternative, and what was the outcome of that process?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm so grateful and honored to be here with you all. And I know you're making so many people feel so seen with this report and this work, myself included. I see it in the chat. So yeah, thank you so much. Um, so when I experienced sexual violence, I didn't know that any justice options existed other than the carceral criminal legal system. I had no idea. Like if I go on Netflix and watch all the shows, they're all in courtrooms, right? So I ended up reporting because I thought there was nothing else and I couldn't fathom doing nothing at all. But never did I think that having the man who raped me incarcerated would eradicate rape culture, would stop sexual violence, would even help me heal. So I ended up going through the court process, kind of going through the motions for 3 years. And for any survivor who's been through that process, we know it is so re traumatizing. It is so dehumanizing. We start to feel like we're the ones on trial. And at the same time, like I was thinking about what I really needed, which was all the things you named, already accountability, making sure this person didn't do this again to anyone else, wanting to ask the questions I was holding in for years. And the court process wasn't giving me any of that. And so by the time I was subpoenaed for the criminal trial, I was like, what is the point? What is the point of all this? Like, everyone's just walking away more traumatized. And so I started doing my own research on my own time, which I don't think survivors should have to do. I think we should be informed about these options. And that's when I saw restorative justice for the first time. And I saw that it's a process that prioritizes repair over punishment. And it's been done in Indigenous, Mennonite communities for hundreds of years. And it was the first time for me, like this report's doing, that I saw, oh, I'm not alone in wanting something that's not punitive. Because prior to that, I was like, what is wrong with me for wanting healing, right? And then as I saw I wasn't alone, I validated it enough to fight for the outcome. And luckily, I was able to speak to one prosecutor after speaking to a different prosecutor who was very set in a carceral mindset. But I did get to talk to one, and she really got it. She said, like, yeah, this system is piling harm on top of harm. It's making people more traumatized, more violent. And so I agree, we need to do something different. And thanks to her, like just one person who was willing to turn towards survivors and listen, thanks to her, I was able to get this outcome. And what that meant was my rapist went to therapy for 7 months. And that was everything to me. Again, echoing the report here, right? Like, that was everything to me to have him in therapy, unpacking everything that led him to justify this degree of violence, right? And then we eventually met in a mediated circle process where I finally got to ask my questions, show up as my authentic self rather than the court's version of a credible, in quotes, victim. I got to hear him take accountability. I got to hear about the deep rehabilitation work he'd been supported in doing to make sure he never does this again. And I walked away from that space so empowered and feeling like I'd let go of like 6 million pounds of trauma, systemic trauma, intergenerational trauma. Like, it was so huge. And I just walked out of that space and I was like, why had I never heard of this before? Like, why had no one told me about this? I was studying social work. I was like, why isn't this in the curriculum? Um, so I just got really passionate about essentially being loud, what I'm doing right now, being loud about this topic, making sure people know that restorative and transformative justice exist, that the carceral punitive system isn't the only option, and that we deserve versions of justice that stop cycles of dehumanization rather than just transferring harm back and forth between victims and perpetrators. So yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
No, thank you so much for sharing. And I think just one thank you for coming to that process and also understanding the importance of therapy in helping people take accountability, heal, and also come home better than they were. You talked away, how that helps you and made you feel like so empowered, right? To not only for yourself, for your family, also for him and communities that who those who hear your story as well. Thank you so much for uplifting that as well. Rafi, I want to go to you. So Marley talked about her experience as a victim of sexual assault, and you come into this work in many roles that you have, as a mother whose son was killed by gun violence and seeking out alternatives to justice outside of the justice system. Usual punitive approaches has been an important part of your healing journey. Can you tell us about your family experiences with the criminal justice system? And also, what I've learned is how you propose a unique sentencing plan for the person who have caused harm to your family that was accepted in that young man's sentence.
Yeah. And first, thank you so much, Marley, for sharing your story, and me being able to hear that space and you having to go through that research. Mine is somewhat similar. Again, I wasn't presented with it, knew nothing about restorative justice. Um, However, being led to that decision actually was not as holistic. or as me automatically wanting something better for the young man. The young man that killed my son in July 9th of 2020, I had the opportunity to lock eyes with him before he left the backyard after shooting my son. And I did see that sense of the remorse, and it stuck with me, but it wasn't at the forefront of my mind as I was navigating the criminal proceedings. He did turn himself in that night. Um, and in the months after, he pled, he turned himself in, but he pled not guilty. I was dealing with a defense attorney that was trying to paint the picture that, to support his defense claims, that I had some kind of way tampered with evidence. At the same time, I had been holding my son, who was telling me he was dying before the EMTs. Some type of way I was supposed to have been hiding a gun and finding his specific bullets in the grass to be able to remove them. I also was dealing with this young man. There was 5 bullets holes that's in my fence. I still have the fence there. And so I say those things because I think that had not divine intervention happened in my case, I don't know. I think it would have took me longer to come to the space that I did. Not that I wouldn't. I think I'm pretty sure I would have, but I think it would have took me longer. Normally, people do not come to that space so quickly because you are made to feel like while you're going through the criminal proceedings, that the value of your life, if you're the victim, or your loved one's life, if it's been taken, is being measured by what the sentencing of that person looks like, right? So at the beginning, when they were first looking at the case, we were told that he would be getting 25 years. And then as, the proceedings go on and they start doing plea agreements, now I will say this, I don't think I ever really wanted him to spend the rest of his life in prison. Because I still saw him as a young man. I saw him as somebody that could have been my child. But I also was concerned in what was going to happen in my own family. I had another young son. I had 2 daughters, that were extremely angry. So I was, my husband, who's 6'5", I was concerned about what retaliation would look like as well. But as we were going through these proceedings and they're going back and forth, I seen somebody mention in the chat, they were talking about how these young people are just given sentences and no accountability is given there. And so, of course, then in your mind, you're thinking the alternative is that you're thinking that the reason why they're doing it is because it's soft on crime. Let me tell you what the straw that broke the camel's back for me was. 2 things. Number one, when we were going through the sentencing negotiations, and when the prosecutor, who was at first talking about how he was going to throw the book at this young man, who had moved to a space of, well, because, the governor said that we only can give this type of sentencing because, we are allowing we're pushing for laws of permanentless carry in our state, and he doesn't have any priors. Don't worry if he doesn't serve this whole sentence right now. He'll do something to somebody else and be back in there, which led me to believe that the sentencing was not about you being soft on crime. The sentencing you were coming up with was to set up a situation so that you send these young people out here in the belief that they are getting away with something so that they can do the situation again. So that was the first thing that was my trigger. The second trigger is that while we were still going through this process, another sister who was in our mother's group, her name is Vicky Hambrick. Her son had just been killed by a police officer, shot in the back. And he was pretty much given the same sentence as the young man that had killed my son. And on the day, her day of sentencing was the same day as we were in the the district attorney's office. This particular day, they had called my husband back there. And normally, which was odd, because normally anytime we were meeting with the district attorney, it was always us as a couple. So it was odd that they had asked him to come in there first, specifically because this was not his biological child. And he wasn't home. I was the only person home when the shooting occurred. So I didn't really understand, but I knew that they had already asked us for our victim witness statements. So I thought maybe they were preparing him for what that process may look like. And then he was back there for a long time. And in that amount of time, in our Mothers Over Murder WhatsApp group, the note, let me, sorry. Sorry about that.
No worries at all.
Thought I turned it off. In my Mothers Over Murder circle, the WhatsApp group, everybody was sending videos of the messages from the woman, Vicky Hambrick, in the courtroom, screaming, like just blood curdling screams of the anger. She was wishing death on the person that killed her son, the judge, the family, everybody. And I remember just looking at that video, like, I don't want to be in a space of that much pain. And all of a sudden, a vision came that I envisioned this young man being mentored by the founder of our mother's group. I wanted him to be mentored while he was in there. I saw him sitting in circle with us mothers and taking account, and one day him mentoring other people. And shortly after that vision occurred, my husband returned from the back, and he was being trailed by probably about 6 very large law enforcement officers. I don't know if some of them were detectives, might have been police officers, because they were going to tell him they were going to accept this agreement of no less than 1 year, no more than 6 years, and despite our reservations against it. And so my husband is 6'5", semi-pro football player, FAMU Hall of Famer, with tears streaming down his face, being trailed by these white men telling me he failed. And in that moment, I had such peace because of the vision. And I was able to tell him that it was okay. And we left, and they told us to return back with our decision. You know, I mean, they told him that more than likely they were not going to. They said that we could fight that, but they really wanted us to encourage us to side with them. And so I shared with him what my vision was. And when I came back, he agreed. We made the proposal to the district attorney, and the district attorney was there, his boss was there, all these detectives are all sitting around. And so I make this proposal, and they're like blown away, like, what? And they're like, well, how is this going to work? And so as I'm sharing to them the whys and the how, and how this proposal was much more than my son, the loss of my son, or this young man who had harmed him, it was for overall benefit of society as a whole. And to see these faces that before looked so evil to me soften, like in understanding. And so I remember the district attorney asking me, he said, okay, we can present this to the defense, but what if they don't take it? And I remember saying, if he doesn't, then that just tells me where he's at. He's not ready to take account. And that's between him and his God, because I've already had my conversation with me and mine. And the next step was presenting it. He did accept it, despite the defense attorney telling him not to, because they already agreed on this other sentence. This acceptance of this sentence put him in a space of basically running a risk of my ally giving a bad progress report that could impact his sentence. So, that he was strongly recommended not to accept it, but he did. And then I had to ask the judge to accept this. And in the courtroom, when I read my statement of what my proposal was, there were some other young men. I think there was at least 2 or 3 other cases in the courtroom at that time that were also similar murder charges. And somebody came up to me after I left out the courtroom and she hugged me. I didn't remember. I remember the hug. I couldn't remember what she said or nothing. That was my step into criminal justice reform. But the interesting thing was that later on in life, after I had started it, I actually got to know the people approached me. These three people who were in the courtroom had approached me. You know, one of them, their son was facing 25 years. He was incarcerated. Another one, her son was out on tether, but he was facing the charges and he was doing a whole bunch of work in different areas. And they were like, you changed everybody in that courtroom's life. Like the impact that you've made. In fact, the young man, one young man, that was in there, he wound up, I think, getting sentenced to like 15 years plus. He had to do a third. So he'll be out in a couple years, but just watching his growth. I didn't know this boy from Boo. And the young man that, you know, killed my son, you know, I haven't met with him yet because as you asked, what was my family's? Just like you said, there's 85% of families that want this. You know, I can see that clearly. My family supported me because I was the mom and I was the one that was in the backyard. But they're still going through their own healing journey as well. And it has only been 4 years. But I think that we need to get into a space of understanding that justice doesn't end with just punishment, that the main thing is about addressing the harm that's been done. Victims want to have that space where the people can take account. And as I was telling my story, as you can hear, they were not setting it up for him to be able to take account. He was set up into a position to fight for his life or for them to just put him out on the streets to do something to somebody else. There's so much more that has to be done than what we're doing now. These restorative practices, a lot of people think that they are in lieu of, or in some way they are letting somebody off soft. And in fact, it really disturbs me because I'm starting to hear the words restorative practices start to be villainized, like diversity and inclusion, like critical race theory. So it's really concerning me. I think it's very important and that people understand that, number one, this gives a space for people to take account. And number two, we as victims should not be forced to feel like our victimization is measured in the sentence. So I'll end it with that.
Woo, wow, Bia. Man, and you can see the chat box, just powerful testimony. Just really appreciate you sharing your story, and your experiences. And one thing that you lifted, I thought was just so powerful is that as part of this process that you and your family went through, and really recommending a different approach to sentencing and justice. Like you mentioned, this is the overall benefit of society, right? It wasn't just about you, your family, and folks in that courtroom and others. Like this is the overall benefit to society, right? That we look at these alternative sentencing models as well. And I think you mentioned you changed the life of what that other mother, you changed the life of everyone at the courtroom. Like you're changing the lives of folks on this call, just listening to you and Marley as well. Rafia, I want to come quickly back to you, then Marley, I'll come to you. Rafia, it's been definitely a pleasure getting to know you over the years. And you reached out to me 2 or 3 years ago, right? We were actually hosting another webinar, and you reached out, was like, hey, this survey, I joined the webinar. I'm working on compensation, working on criminal justice reform in my state. We love any guidance and help, right? That we can provide to you and your organization that you work with. And so, Rafia, you have used these type of surveys, right? I think you've used our most recent, our 2022 report, and also now you're using this report as well. So you've used these types of surveys in your work in Tennessee to educate policy makers. Can you talk about why research like this is important to help advocate for comprehensive victim support, also criminal justice policy reform?
Well, we know policy makers oftentimes don't often see our tears and our emotions. They only can understand the data. I remember, when I was talking to policymakers, when I didn't have data, they would feel like it was just my opinion. There's no other victims out there like that. It's just you. And specifically in the spaces of, most of the time in our law enforcement, in our DAs and our policymakers, most of the victims organizations that they lean on for policy are ones that specifically service white women. And I say that because there's some different dynamics that come into place when we're starting to talk about um, communities that are disproportionately impacted by crime, because a lot of times we're impacted on multiple sides, where we don't see that as much in some others, in other communities and other cultures. And so I think that also takes on a different approach as well. But even as when I talk to those women that are in those organizations and I shared to them my why, then the light bulb goes off for them as well. But yeah, though these were very good reports. I used creating a model victim compensation policy. I think that was the first one I used. I also heavily led depended on crime survivors speak. And in fact, I seen somebody in the chat box, Alyssa Sean, who said when you were talking about when you were reading off the statistics, and she's like, what did you say, 90%? And yeah, that was when I saw that 90% of victims that didn't even know, that didn't even apply, that weren't even being serviced. That was a big deal for me. And those kind of numbers were very concerning to our legislator. And it did help push that legislation, that victims compensation policy, to pass unanimously in the House and the Senate. It was bipartisan. It was led by the chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee, who was a Republican. And so allows you also to cross those aisles, so that they can buy into what you're selling. But that 90%, it floored me. And I knew that was going to also need us to do something else, not just with legislation and policy. We had to figure out a way to get the word out. And that's what led to that 90% led to that Healed People campaign that we're doing across the state here, and partnering with the Tennessee Treasury Department and the local DAs and police departments to educate victims on what compensation, how to apply, what kind of documentation is required. So thank you for giving me a chance to talk about that, because yes, these reports are necessary. And thank you so much for doing that legwork for us, especially with us organizations that don't have the skill set or the resources to do those type of research. It's very necessary.
No, thank you so much, Rafia. And so, Rafia, once again, joined our organization through an invitation from a webinar, and now she's leading efforts in Tennessee and also inspiring, so many folks across the country, and not only changing our justice system, but also removing barriers and increasing access to victim compensation as well. So if you are part of our work, you want to be part of our work, just keep in mind this campaign we're going to be doing in a few months, right? Really across the country of helping to increase access to compensation for survivors as well. And Marley, I want to bring you back to the conversation. It's like everywhere I see you, you're all across the country, right? You're speaking everywhere. You're inspiring us, and you're really having an impact. And also, you're very busy as well. And so, you've also recently founded Survivors for Justice Reform. Why is it important for you? Why was it important for you to help start this new coalition? And also, you have this terminology of survivor-centered justice. So why is it important for you to help start a Survivors for Justice Reform Coalition? And what does survivor justice mean?
Yes, thank you. And by the way, I can't respond to folks in the chat, but you're all just amazing, and I'm so inspired by the work that folks are doing, and by everything you shared, Rafia. So thank you so much. So I think that I had the same bias that we're here to challenge, which is this idea that a lot of survivors want tough on crime. And when I experienced restorative justice and was so amazed by it, I decided to go public with it, to share about it in the media, because I knew there had to be some survivors who like would want this as well. But I thought there'd be majority of survivors who were saying like, hush, hush, we don't want this. Like, we want punitive. Please stop talking. So I was nervous to share. But when I went to the media, I started receiving like exactly what the reports show, thousands and thousands and thousands of messages from survivors of sexual violence all over the world who were saying like, I wish I knew about this. People saying, you know, I never reported. We know that only 6% of sexual violence survivors report, for a lot of reasons. So people saying, I never reported, I endured abuse for years because I didn't want to go to that process. Or for queer, trans, Black, Indigenous survivors of color, I didn't feel safe, or I wasn't safe going to law enforcement. I wish I knew about another option. People saying, I did go through the court process, it tore my family apart. I wish I knew about this other option. People saying, I went through the court process for 5 years and it ended with a not guilty plea, and I'm more traumatized than ever. I wish I knew about this process. So as I heard more and more and more of these stories from survivors all over the world, and I heard people saying, I wish I knew about this, that's when I was like, okay, I'm really going to dedicate my life to public education, just campaigns, shifting representation around what people think survivors want, until we all realize that like the tough on crime assumption just isn't the facts. And as I was doing this work, at the same time, I'm hearing from policymakers and folks in institutions holding a lot of power saying, Marley, you're the only one who would ever want this. You're the only one who would ever want this. And then at the same time, I'm hearing from thousands and thousands and thousands of survivors who are saying, hey, we all want this. So as I've done this work, I've seen that one of the biggest barriers to survivors accessing restorative justice on a legislation level, on an authority level, is this misperception where people think survivors want the punitive approach. And so another thing I hear a lot is some people saying, and it seems to be pretty universal, people saying, I support restorative justice, but not for sexual and domestic violence. Like people seem to have a threshold there where they're like, it could work for other things, but not for that. And meanwhile, it was a life-changing, transformative process for me. And again, there's all these survivors who are saying, no, we really, really want this. This aligns with our needs. So part of why I wanted to form this coalition was so that we could shift perception in the world and kind of challenge this adversarial thing the justice system does, where they say, hush, survivor, we know better than you. Punishment is what you need in order to be okay. Whatever you think you might need that doesn't align with that is wrong, right? It's like we want to challenge that adversarial approach and shift into survivor-centered justice. And so what that means to me is we're turning towards the people who are harmed, and we're asking them, what do you need right now in order to start to heal, in order to feel a sense of justice? And even if their response isn't what we would want, we put those biases aside and we really try and listen and advocate accordingly. And as the reports are showing, as my experience, as Rafia's experience, as so many people I've connected with show, it's not necessarily going to be a response that says punitive, tough on crime. And what was the other thing I was going to say with that? Oh no. And I think that's a really important shift that needs to happen. And I've also heard people say things like, the legislation does allow us to do restorative justice, but we're not going to offer it to survivors because we're afraid that that's minimizing the crime. And Rafia spoke to that a little bit, this idea that it's letting people off the hook. And we really need to shift that. And to me, we need to stop as a culture saying, is it too soft on crime? Is it tough enough on crime? And we just need to ask better questions. You know, is it effective in enhancing public safety? Is it effective in reducing future violence? Is it meaningful for the person who was harmed? Like, to me, these are just better questions. So that's what the coalition is all about. And to me, bringing people together from across the world is such a powerful thing, because we're also showing how universal the tough on crime carceral assumptions are. And we're showing that it's time for something different. It's time to listen to survivors and really just hold this movement that Oswald, you're leading so powerfully, Rafia, you're embodying so powerfully. Hold this movement together and show the world that we don't just want punitive, we actually want cycles of dehumanization to stop.
That's part of this new victims' rights movement as well, right? And so one more question for the two of you, then I'm going to talk about some strategies on how folks can use this report, to change policies in their communities, in their states. So one question for both of you. I'll start with you, Marley. Based on your experiences, what message would you like to send to victims, advocates, and policymakers about the kind of justice and support that truly benefit victims, survivors, and communities? What
Yeah,
message?
I mean, it's such a big question, but I think back to where I was emotionally after sexual violence. And I eventually was in a place, like, I was having panic attacks. Like, I was eventually in a place where I was like, I don't know if this is the world that I want to live in, like, if this is how we're treating each other, right? And so what really, really was breaking me at the time was like the way we dehumanize one another, how quickly we are to objectify, dispose of one another, devalue each other's lives. And as I was going through the punitive process, I was like, isn't this asking me to continue that cycle? Like, isn't it asking me? And people can disagree with that, like, I'm a big fan of there's no one size fits all. But in my heart, I was like, this is asking me to create and continue a cycle of dehumanization in the world. And in an actual, like, kind of selfish way, I was like, that's breaking me. Like, that's breaking me. And so I think that, like Rafia said, it's not just about us, like, it's bigger than us. It's for the benefit of society and culture and future generations. And to me, my ultimate goal and vision for the world is that we've eradicated rape culture. Like, sexual violence isn't happening. It's not that we one by one pick off all the people we've deemed bad seeds and we lock them up and say we've dealt with it, right? Like, to me, there's a world where we're actually stopping these cycles, we're preventing future violence, and those processes need to flip rape culture on its head by normalizing consent culture. So our justice processes have to affirm the consent and boundaries and humanity of every person involved. We have to recognize that there's no one size fits all when it comes to justice, because victims are not a monolith and perpetrators are not a monolith. There's no one, two, three step process to heal, and there's no one, two, three step process to find justice, right? So what actually happens when we turn to survivors, ask, what do you need in this moment? And we let those needs, like accountability, for example, shape the justice process. What if we get creative about that in order to make sure it's accessible for everyone that we're serving? And what if we actually contextualize harm? So instead of saying this one person's bad, end of story, we contextualize and say, what led them to this point? What happened in their life? What conditioning did they receive? What systemic violence have they endured and faced, right? And how do we shift everything that's complicit in culture to stop these cycles and make sure that we're creating public safety, which I know is what this movement is all about. So that was a whole spiel, but that's sort of what I would say.
So many amazing strategies and jewels in there as well. Rafia, same question for you. Based on your experience, what message would you like to send to victims, advocates, and policymakers about the kind of
I don't think I can very much more add to that. I mean, I think number one, I love what you said, Marley, about let's eliminate these categories. of tough on crime and soft on crime. I think let's start there, number one. Uh, but just like Marley said, the focus has to be on healing, restorations, giving us these resources to rebuild our lives, investing in trauma informed support services, the things that we need, focusing on the things that victim needs and prioritizing preventative measures, especially in our neighborhoods and in our communities, when we are a victim, and there's also when we're surrounded disproportionately by violence in our communities. Um, we have to focus on rehabilitation, and that does not just have to be just incarceration. And what we see most likely is that even through incarceration, there's no focus there on the rehabilitation. And I think if you ask every single victim, regardless on if they how they view what justice looks like, every single one of them is going to want to say that they just want that person to feel bad about what they did. They want them to take account for what they did. And when we say take account, I think it's very we really have to focus on take account and held accountability, because you being held accountable does nothing for me. I often say with about the young man that took my son's life, he cannot give me back my son with his body. He can't. No matter how many years they gave him, no matter if it was the worst sentence that could possibly happen, my son would not return to this earth. And so when they ask me, well, what do you want to happen to him? What does the future look like for this young man? And I also always say, I want him to solve world hunger. I want him to travel to Jupiter and Mars or wherever. And I want him to be able to save as many lives as possible, because then I can feel like his work means that my son was not lost in vain. And even though I don't get my son back, him trying to put back what he took means just so much more to me. Since I have been in this space of criminal justice reform, I have worked with organizations who are made up primarily by justice impacted individuals who have been sentenced, who have done 25, 30 years in prison. Most of them were as youth. So they're out now at the age of 40 or whatever. And being able to see them trying to put back what they took allows me to see a future for this young man. Right now, he's doing well. I have not yet sat in space with him. As like I said, my family is still in different spaces of healing, and so we want to respect that before we do the sit down. But I think that being able to see the future with these other young people makes me feel like what I did was the correct choice beyond a shadow of a doubt. And I also just thank you for allowing me to be in this space, because it really helps empowering storytelling advocacy for those of us who are so close to the problem, who have been impacted, in this space, have given survivors speak. I love that, because that empowerment, that being able to say what has happened to us and share our stories, it also is another way to help us with our healing journey. So thank you very much for that.
No, thank you, and thank you again, Marley. One thing that I'm like, man, this conversation going for whole 3 hours. All right, so how powerful it was. I know we talked about some ideas that we have for future conversations as well. And thank you to the audience. Y'all have been so engaged, so uplifting, so empowering. These survey findings, right, is what people from across the country have said, right? And what I always appreciate about us doing these type of outreach to survivors across the country is that it identifies with experiences of like real people, right? So these surveys, not just surveys that we just we've talked to people that don't exist. Like these are real people's lives, and you all heard that today through Rafia and Marty on their experience and what they think the justice system, better justice system, should look like. So you heard about the survey findings. You heard directly from Rafia and Marley, and now I actually wanted to spend a few minutes talking about, how you can use these strategies, use this report to help change policies in your state. So we have like five key strategies that you all can use using this survey to help shift the narrative about who crime victims are, what they want, and how we can change policies as well. So number one, if you haven't already, I put it in the link several times. I'll do that again. Click the link, download the report, share the report with stakeholders in your network, with your organizations, listserv, with your loved ones, with your family, with communities, to really help widen the survey's reach and influence, and help to emphasize the importance of survivor centered approaches to justice reform. Another thing that you can do is you can host policy briefings. You can host these policy briefings virtually or in person using the report. You can host these policy briefings with legislators, media reporters, right, key stakeholders about these findings of what survivors' experiences are with the justice system and the type of policies that they want. You host these policy briefings and really provide actionable policy recommendations to those key stakeholders that really align with what crime victims want and what our views are on safety and justice. I know many of you, whether it's you're in your staff meeting or you're at conferences, events, in your communities, or doing presentations, you can incorporate these survey findings in the report. We have some beautiful graphics, that you can use these survey findings in your presentations. At conferences, at meetings, at seminars, to really continue to showcase the survey insights and help us, expanding the reach to a broader set of individuals, of audience, of advocates, professionals, and policymakers, also community members as well. Number four, you also can develop your own individual, your own organizations media campaign, using this survivor and victim centered messaging in the report. That is so important now more than ever to continue to shift the narrative, from a punitive justice system to uplifting victim centered solutions by highlighting what crime victims really want from the justice system, as we all heard today. And I know many of us are preparing for 2025 legislative session. So you also can develop, in collaboration with us, if you work with us, or in your state, you also can develop survivor and victim centered policy recommendations. So you can use findings in this report. They offer concrete policy solutions, things like earn credit type of policies to help advance policy changes in your state as well. So start meeting with legislators and their staffers as they are preparing for next year's legislative session, to help present these findings and also to propose, different legislative solutions, that can advance policies in the state that you are working in as well. So I know we have a few minutes. We do have time for some Q&A. I'm going to scan the chat box and the Q&A to see if we have any questions for our panelists. So we have two questions. So I think I can probably answer these questions. There's one question around victim compensation. How do I access victim compensation if there is no case? That is a great question. One of the barriers that we see with victim compensation is the requirements that's often tied to the justice system. In most states, in order to access victim compensation, you have to file a police report within a certain amount of time. You have to cooperate with law enforcement as well. But in majority of cases, there is no case, right? As well. So based on what state that you are living. There may be alternative reporting for folks to access compensation, but also one of the reasons why we, like to elevate programs like the trauma recovery center model, and we need more trauma recovery centers across the country, is that you don't need a police report. You can walk into a trauma recovery center and say that I'm a survivor or a victim of a violent crime, and the center will provide you wraparound services, whether it's case management, helping you fill out the victim compensation program, helping with housing relocation, grief support, individual or family support services, as well as our way of helping to build an infrastructure of victim services. This is not solely tied to the justice system through the trauma recovery center model. Another question, um, uh, uh, can I still press charges if I waited to file a police report? I'm not a policy expert in that sense, but depending on the state, yes, you can still file a police report as well. That doesn't, your state, depending on the statutory guidelines that still exist, but in most states, yes, you can still file police a report and could potentially still press charges as well. But once again, how do we build infrastructure in communities that we're not always often relying on the justice system to help victims get access to services, but also how do we change this justice system to actually meet the needs of survivors in our communities as well. So those were the few questions that we have. Before we wrap up today's conversation, I just wanted to share one, thank you so much again to you, Marley and Rafia. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. This has been a powerful conversation with you all. Thank you so much to everyone that was joined us for today. The chat box was on fire. A lot of discussions happening, a lot of encouragement, a lot of support, and also a lot of alignment with these survey findings as well. So we've heard, powerful insights from Marley and Rafia. You all also heard, just me walk through some of the findings in this national survey of victims' views on safety and justice. And, as our national survey demonstrates, for most victims, safety has never been about being tough on crime. Safety has never been about locking people up for as long as we can. For most victims, safety is more substance abuse programs, more job training, more housing, more mental health programs, more trauma recovery centers. Safety is employment and jobs, right? And also safety is ensuring that for people who have caused harm, that they have access to rehabilitative programs, and also they have a reason to pursue those programs as well. And also safety is also ensuring that, when people come home out of the justice system, that they can access jobs, housing, things that promote stability as well. Those are the foundations for us to live in a just, safe society. So as we move forward, as we close today's webinar, I encourage each of you to use the information that we've shared today. We will send out the recording with also the links to the survey. Use what you shared today to drive change in your communities, in your states, and help us drive change across the country. Remember, every one of us, we have a key role in helping to create healthier and safer communities, whether it's through advocating for policy change, supporting other survivors, or educating our communities. Your efforts are vital and really make a difference in helping us to heal the healing and safety that we need as well. Let's continue to build on this momentum from today's conversation. Stay connected with Crime Survivor for Safety and Justice and the Alliance for Safety and Justice. Reach out to Marley, reach out to Rafia. They put their information in the chat box. Stay connected. Let's share the knowledge that you've gained today. Share it with I challenge you all to share what you've heard and what you've learned with at least one person who wasn't part of today's webinar. Reach out to the elected officials, at the local level, at the state level, to inform them about this survey, and you can share that survey with them as well. And let's all of us take steps and really get ready to continue to shift the narrative about who survivors are and what we want, and help us continue to build a better and more effective and more effective justice system that's rooted in our experiences as survivors as well. So thank you all so much for joining us. Once again, we appreciate you all. I will follow up an email later today with the link to the webinar recording, also the link to the survey results as well. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And once again, thank you so much, Marley and Rafia, for being part of today's webinar. Now, as we say as an organization, when survivors speak, change happens, and we will talk to you all soon. Bye, everyone.